What if I told you that the Great Depression didn't destroy wealth, it just changed hands? That while 25% of the American population was unemployed and millions lost their homes, some families multiplied their fortunes tenfold. That 1929 was not an economic crisis, but the largest wealth transfer operation in modern history. The official narrative teaches us that the Great Depression was a catastrophe that impoverished America. But the numbers tell a different story. Between 1929 and 1935, while American GDP shrank by 30%, the concentration of wealth in the hands of the richest 1% increased from 23% to 34%. Mathematically impossible if wealth had truly been destroyed. John D. Rockefeller, who in 1929 was already the richest man in America, saw his fortune grow by 50% during the worst years of the Depression. J.P. Morgan Jr. acquired more than 200 companies between 1930 and 1933. Paying pennies on the dollar of their real value, the Rothschild family increased their gold reserves by 300%, while desperate governments sold their reserves at liquidation prices. How is this possible during the greatest economic crisis in history? The answer lies in understanding a fundamental law they never taught us. In closed economic systems, wealth does not disappear, it transfers. And 1929 was the first documented example of how this transfer can be orchestrated on an industrial scale. What happened in 1929 was not a market accident. It was the birth of an operating system that transforms periodic crises into wealth transfer mechanisms. A template so effective that it continues to be used today, refined with each new crisis that always benefits the same groups. 29 was not a crisis. It was the greatest wealth transfer in history, disguised as a natural catastrophe. There is a fundamental law of physics that also applies to economics. Energy is neither created nor destroyed, it only transforms. The same principle governs wealth in closed economic systems. When millions lose everything, billions go to a few. They don't disappear into the ether. During the Great Depression, $30 billion in stock value disappeared from the market between October 1929 and July 1932. But a deeper analysis reveals that this value was not destroyed. It was transferred through mechanisms that most people did not understand then and still do not understand today. The crucial difference is between nominal value and control of real assets. When General Motors shares fell from 8, the nominal value plummeted 89%. But GM's factories, machinery, patents, and productive capacity remained intact. What changed was who controlled these real assets. If this revelation about how wealth transfers instead of disappearing shocked you as much as it shocked me when I discovered this data, leave a like. I want to know how many people are seeing for the first time how this hidden math of crises works. The Rockefellers understood this perfectly. While small investors sold shares in a panic for pennies, they bought entire companies at liquidation prices. They were not interested in the value of the shares. They were interested in controlling the productive assets that these shares represented. Joseph Kennedy, father of the future president, applied the same principle in the real estate market. Between 1930 and 1935, he acquired more than 500 properties in Manhattan for a fraction of the construction value. The buildings did not disappear, they just changed owners. And when the economy recovered, Kennedy controlled a real estate empire that would make him one of America's most powerful families. The law of conservation of wealth reveals the inconvenient truth. Crises do not impoverish societies. They redistribute wealth massively and rapidly. The question is not whether the transfer will happen, but in which direction it will flow. While the official narrative focuses on the suffering of the masses, financial records reveal a parallel story. How some families used the Great Depression to consolidate economic power in an unprecedented way in American history. John D. Rockefeller not only maintained his fortune during the Depression, he strategically expanded it. In 1929, he primarily controlled oil. By 1935, he had diversified into banking, railroads, mining, and agriculture. His strategy was simple: use accumulated liquidity to buy productive assets from entrepreneurs desperate for capital. Records from Chase National Bank, controlled by the Rockefellers, show that between 1930 and 1933, the bank acquired stakes in over 300 companies through loans that converted into equity when debtors could not pay. It was not predation. It was systematic consolidation of economic control. J.P. Morgan Jr. followed an even more sophisticated strategy. His firm J.P. Morgan & Co. became the main intermediary between the American government and private investors during the crisis. They not only profited from commissions, they positioned themselves as controllers of the capital flow that would determine which companies would survive and which would fail. The Rothschild family applied a global version of the same strategy. While European governments sold their gold reserves to finance recovery programs, the Rothschilds bought gold at depressed prices. Between 1929 and 1935, they accumulated more gold than some central banks, positioning themselves to control the next global monetary restructuring. But the most documented case is that of Andrew Mellon, Secretary of the Treasury during the beginning of the crisis. Publicly, he advocated austerity policies and letting the market correct itself. Privately, his Mellon Bank was acquiring smaller banks that failed due to the policies he himself implemented. Conflict of interest or coordinated strategy? The numbers are unequivocal. The 20 wealthiest families in America increased their combined net worth by 67% between 1929 and 1935, while the average American net worth fell by 40%. The transfer was not accidental, it was systematic. The wealth transfer of 1929 did not happen by chance. It followed 4 precise mechanisms that turned crisis into opportunity for those with knowledge and strategic liquidity. Mechanism 1. Purchase of undervalued assets. While most sold in a panic, the ultra-rich systematically bought. But they didn't buy just anything. They focused on productive assets with intrinsic value. Factories, land, patents, companies with positive cash flow. The strategy was simple. Buy for pennies assets that would be worth dollars when the economy recovered. Mechanism 2. Control of credit. During crises, credit becomes scarce. Whoever controls banks controls who survives and who fails. The Rockefellers, Morgan, and Mellon not only had liquidity, they controlled the institutions that decided who would receive loans to survive the crisis. This gave them life and death power over competing companies. Mechanism 3. Political influence. Andrew Mellon as Secretary of the Treasury is the perfect example. Public policies that created private opportunities. Regulations that benefited large banks at the expense of small ones. Recovery programs that channeled public resources to companies controlled by the same groups that influenced policies. Mechanism 4. Creation of dependence. The most sophisticated, not just buying struggling companies, but creating long-term contracts that guaranteed perpetual dependence, loans with collateral that transferred operational control, partnerships that seemed like salvation, but were actually disguised acquisitions. Share this with anyone who needs to understand how this systematic transfer works, because they didn't predict the crisis. They orchestrated it to transfer wealth on an industrial scale. What makes these mechanisms even more effective is that they operate simultaneously and reinforce each other. Credit control allows buying undervalued assets. Political influence creates favorable regulations. Created dependence ensures long-term control. It is an integrated system of wealth transfer. The clearest evidence lies in property concentration records. In 1929, the 200 largest American corporations controlled 38% of corporate wealth. By 1935, they controlled 57%. Consolidation was not the result of the crisis. It was the objective of the crisis. History does not repeat itself, but the mechanisms rhyme with mathematical precision. Every crisis since 1929 follows the same wealth transfer template, only with technological and regulatory refinements. 2008, the digital repetition. The 2008 financial crisis was 1929 with derivatives. While millions lost homes and jobs, the same families who profited in 1929 repeated the strategy. Warren Buffett, intellectual heir to the Rockefellers, bought stakes in Goldman Sachs and Bank of America at liquidation prices. Jamie Dimon, J. P. Morgan Chase acquired Bear Stearns and Washington Mutual for pennies. The numbers are identical. Between 2007 and 2012, the net worth of the richest 1% grew by 11%, while the average American net worth fell by 39%. The same transfer, the same beneficiaries, the same mechanisms. COVID-19. The exponential acceleration. The pandemic was the fastest wealth transfer in history. In 18 months, American billionaires increased their net worth by $2.1 trillion, while 40 million Americans lost jobs. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and others applied exactly the same four mechanisms of 1929, only at digital speed. Current inflation. The silent transfer. The inflation of 2021-2024 is the most sophisticated mechanism, transfer through monetary devaluation. Those who own real assets, real estate, stocks, commodities, protect themselves and profit. Those who only have cash or salaries lose purchasing power. It's 1929 in slow motion, disguised as monetary policy. Subscribe here for analyses on how to recognize and protect yourself from the next transfers, because the pattern continues to operate and the next one is already being orchestrated. The most disturbing evidence lies in the consistency of the beneficiaries. The same families who profited in 1929, Rockefeller, Morgan, Rothschild, maintain control through foundations, banks, and corporations that continue to apply the same mechanisms. These are not coincidences. They are institutionalized strategies. The pattern reveals an inconvenient truth. Crises are not system failures. They are system features. They serve as redistribution mechanisms that concentrate wealth periodically and systematically. The crucial difference is that now we have enough historical data to recognize the pattern before it completes. The question is whether we will use this knowledge to protect ourselves or continue to be voluntary victims of the next transfer. The next transfer has already begun. The question is which side you will be on. The signs are identical to those of 1929. Concentration of liquidity in the hands of a few, policies that create systemic dependence, and narratives that prepare the public to accept necessary sacrifices. Current warning signs: central banks accumulating gold while promoting digital currencies, corporations buying residential real estate en masse, governments creating dependence through debt-financed social programs, regulations that benefit large corporations at the expense of small businesses. Protection strategies. The mindset of the ultra-rich during crises is simple: strategic liquidity plus real assets plus geographical diversification plus cash flow control. They don't try to predict when the crisis will happen. They position themselves to profit when it does. Practical positioning. First, understand that money in a checking account is vulnerability during transfers. Second, income-generating assets, productive real estate, cash-flowing businesses, scarce resources, benefit from crises. Third, geographical diversification protects against destructive local policies. Fundamental mindset. Stop thinking like a victim of crises and start thinking like a beneficiary of opportunities. The same forces that impoverished millions in 1929 enriched thousands. The difference was not luck, it was preparation and positioning. In the comments, tell me which protection strategy you will implement first, and if you can identify signs of the next transfer already happening around you. The most important lesson from 1929 is not that crises are inevitable, it's that wealth transfers are predictable. They follow patterns, have warning signs, and benefit those who understand the mechanisms. The system will not change because it benefits those who have the power to change it. But you can change your position within the system. You can stop being an involuntary donor and become a conscious recipient of the next transfers. The wealth that will be transferred in the next crisis already exists. It is just waiting to change hands. The only question is whether those hands will be yours or someone who studied the patterns of 1929 better. The greatest trick in history was not making wealth disappear in 1929. It was convincing people that it had disappeared, when in fact it had only changed addresses. And this trick continues to work because most people still believe that crises destroy wealth, instead of understanding that they merely redistribute it. Now you know the truth. The next transfer is inevitable. The only variable is whether you will be prepared to receive or destined to donate.